there are times you don't like the work you're doing, or you may not like somebody you're working with. But if that is happening over and over and over, it's time to do something about it. I have the capability, I have the means in order to start my own business, and now's the time. And I have never regretted that decision. Sometimes we put these limits in our head and they hold us back. It's like, how far can you push your mind and body? And you can probably push it further than you can think. People that accomplish big things in the office, at work, often accomplish big things elsewhere. And there's a lot of similarities between what you have to do in sports or in business. And that's how epic performance came to be.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. I'm your host, Nicky Ballou, and boy, do we have an exciting guest lined up for you today. Today's guest is a former Silicon Valley HR executive. He's the founder of his own leadership consulting business, and he's an amateur ultra endurance athlete, a lot like my sweetheart, my better half, who does crazy things like run 12 hours on a treadmill. This gentleman has ridden his bike across the United States and run 205 miles around Lake Tahoe. I am speaking, of course, of none other than the one, the only, the legendary Bryan Gilette. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
It's nice to be on the show, Nicky. Your better half spent 12 hours on a treadmill.
3 times.
Did I hear that correctly? Three times.
Yeah.
All right. People think I do crazy things. I don't know that I'd want to spend 12 hours on a treadmill. Good for her.
You're both crazy. So let's just say that. I did the first hour the first time with her.
Oh, 12 hours.
I cheered her on after that. Yeah, for sure.
Good for you. You know, with anybody that is anybody that's doing something big, you need somebody behind you cheering you on. So you helped her get those 12 hours, Nicky.
Amen, brother. Amen. So, Bryan, God bless you, man. Thanks so much for coming here. I know that you've got a book out called Epic Performance: Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. I was interested in having you on the show because I date high-end world record holding endurance athlete. I've had a lot of good friends who are top-level athletes, Olympic gold medalists, and I always am curious about the mindset of a top performer in athletics. So, for me, that's kind of like the reason I wanted to have you on. But this show is dedicated to the entrepreneur. Right. The show is dedicated to the men and women who have the courage and the guts to have a dream and put it out there and make it happen. And, I'm a champion for freedom, free enterprise, and free expression. And my listeners come here because they believe in those values too. And they want to learn from you. They don't want to hear from me. They hear from me every week. So, before they can open themselves up to you, though, they got to get to know you. Tell us your backstory. How'd you get to be the great Bryan Gilette?
Well, it's good. I look forward to the conversation. So about 10 years ago, I was head of HR, and I thought, I've always wanted to run my own company, and so started up a leadership development consulting company. But prior to that, go back to when I was a teenager, I loved to bicycle. And I remember I did and I had parents that supported me. I did a 200-mile bicycle trip I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, from San Francisco Bay Area up to Yosemite. So 200 miles, 4 days. My parents went with me, which I thought was just amazing. And I really had a good time. And that got me going into other ultra distance. I continued to ride further and further. And then you do the 100 miles in a day and 200 miles. And eventually did 300 miles in a day, and I cycled across the U.S. And I enjoyed kind of going long distance under my own power, and then eventually got into running. And you do the marathon, and then that goes up to a 50, then to 100, and eventually to a 200 mile around just Lake Tahoe, which is this beautiful lake. It's like, how far can you push your mind and body? And at one point I realized you can probably push it further than you can think. Um,
Yeah.
but that was not going to pay the bills. I always enjoyed the business aspect, so and kind of the leadership development. So started off, working in some leadership development functions, and then eventually kind of continued to move my way up into human resources, and then running HR for a mid-sized technology company. And so it just I love that I love the business side. I love the endurance side. And I thought there were a lot of similarities, and we can talk more about that given your interest as well.
So what made you decide to leave corporate and become your own boss?
I knew early on that eventually wanted to run my own business, but I also knew that I needed to get certain skills in order to do that. My dad, he ran his own business. He was a contractor, and I could always go down, he had an office down kind of at the more in the basement of the house, and I could always go down there and just see him. And I thought it was so cool. Just that, my dad wasn't gone 10 hours a day, and I could just go down and I could talk to him for a while. And then, I always had a summer job because I could always work for him for the summer. And so I thought that was a great way. I have a good relationship with my dad, and I thought, eventually I want to run my own business. And part of it was because I want to be able to have my kids experience some of the things I had. Um, and and so about 10 years ago, actually 10 years ago last month, I is when I started it. And the 5 years prior to that, my wife and I had been to a dozen funerals. And and I thought, my kids were, I think, 3 and 5 at the time. And I thought, I don't want to miss seeing them grow up. You have this certain amount of time that you have with the kids, and eventually they go off to college, they go off, and we're getting closer to that. And I didn't want to miss that. And also, my parents, both parents are in their 80s, is I didn't want to miss out on kind of towards the end. And so I thought, I have the capability, I have the means in order to start my own business, and now's the time. And I remember I had made the decision, and my wife calls me up. She goes, "You made the right decision," because her father-in-law just got kind of a diagnosis with cancer that it wasn't going to be long. And it's like, okay. And I have never regretted that decision.
That's, that's quite a poignant story, man. And I think we're put here on earth to live, to love, to grow, to contribute, to learn.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing those things, I don't think you're going to feel fulfilled. And certainly,
Yeah.
I don't feel fulfilled when I'm not doing those things. So good on you, man, that you had the
Well,
guts, the balls to do it.
I mean, I remember when I was in college and I was dating this woman, and we were up talking to her mom, and her mom was probably my age now, in mid 50s, and she was doing a job she hated. And she didn't like the people, she didn't like the work, she didn't like the organization, and just was kind of bitching and moaning about it. And I thought, I never want to be in a situation like that. I never want to be there. There are times you don't like the work you're doing, or you may not like somebody you're working with. But if that is happening over and over and over, it's time to do something about it. And I thought, I never want to be in that situation. And I can comfortably say I've never been in that situation for long periods of time where it's like, I really hate what I'm doing. It's like, okay, let's change it then.
Bang on, man. Bang on. I think that's super, super important. You don't want to be doing something that doesn't speak to your soul.
Yeah,
So
life's too short.
life is too short. So how did you decide on exactly the niche that you were going to go after? How did you get clear on that?
I looked at what I was good at and what I enjoyed doing. What is it that I'm really good at? What is it I really like to do? And only focus on those areas. And I think I can be better at my job for only focusing on a few things. So, I work with companies that they're trying to figure out their strategic plan, and they're bringing the team together to get everybody aligned. And so getting that team aligned around some common things and around some big things is what I enjoy doing. Or working individually with a leader on how do you optimize your leadership. And so those are the two things that I really enjoy doing, and I think I've demonstrated some success at it. So when somebody comes up and says, "Hey Bryan, can you help me with this aspect of HR?" Even though I've done it, it's like, I could, but I'm not the best person to do that. You could probably hire somebody cheaper to do it and get a better job because they're staying more up to speed on some of those things. And I remember early on, talking to people and say, you really got to focus on what are the two or three things you can do well or that you want to do. And it took a few years before I think I finally got that figured out.
I was talking to somebody today and I drew this Venn diagram for them. And we were looking at what's the best way to decide who to work with. Well, first of all, look at who pays you the best. So what's kind of like the most lucrative work? Who do you love working with the most, right? And who do you get the best results for? And what's the sweet spot where all three of those intersect? You figure that out and you just keep aiming for that sweet spot.
You're I mean, it's great advice, Nikki. And it's not rocket science.
No,
but
it's not.
And even the stuff that I have in my book, I mean, I don't think it's rocket science, but it just gets people, oh yeah, I need to think about that. How do I draw that Venn diagram, and where's that stuff in the center? And really focus on who do I want to work for? What do I want to do? Yeah, I love what you're doing, Nikki.
No, that's important stuff, I think. And it's good that you managed to discover, what you like to do and what you were good at, because that's part of the intersection too, right? So this lady, she's in HR too, funnily enough. And we had a long conversation because she can do so much. She's got a little bit of a one woman, full service HR consultancy, but a bunch of the things she was doing, I thought, man, you're not getting paid a lot of money for doing those. She goes, yeah, you're right, I'm not. I'm like, why do you want to keep doing that then? She goes, oh, that's a good question. And then the second question was, there's stuff you don't want to do, but you're really good at, right? But you just don't like doing them. There's certain kinds of, HR harassment claims and that sort of thing. Yeah. She was like, yeah, I'm good at this, but man, that's going into the negativity of the world. And I just don't want to be in there. So I don't want to be offering that kind of work out to the people. And I go, well, then don't. Like that's
take it off your menu.
Yeah, take it off your menu.
I'm with you. I've had people call me up and said, hey, can you help me with recruiting, or can you help me with harassment claims? It's like, I don't want to. Go get somebody that's better at it and can do it better. So yeah, you're spot on, Nikki.
Exactly. I mean, the business of thought leadership, the business of being an authority or an expert is fascinating in and of itself, because how to make that work for you so that you're doing stuff you love, you're getting paid what you should be getting paid, and you're living a life of purpose and fulfillment. I think all of those are important questions that people in the work we do need to contemplate from time to time.
And one of the things I look at is, and I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they were trying to decide, do I do that? Do they do this big project? And it was an exciting project. I could tell they were excited about it, but it was going to take a lot of time. And I looked at the person and I said, in 20 years or 30 years, are you going to regret not doing this? And usually people will think a little bit about that. And he was like, yeah, I'll regret it. And I said, you got to do it. And I've asked myself that question so many times. I asked it when I was going to start my own company. It's like, okay, years ago, I'd started dating who's now my wife, and I was thinking about traveling around the world and spending, a long period of time. We ended up spending 7 months, and I was leaving my job in the middle of a career. Kind of in at the height of when you would be making money. But it's like, I asked myself, okay, will I regret not taking these 7 months off kind of in a sabbatical and going traveling around the world? Will I regret that in 10, 15 years? And it's like, yeah, I will. I got to go do it. And so I often ask that question. And then the other thing you were talking about is, whenever we think about doing something big, we come up with a whole lot of excuses. I'm too old, I'm too fat, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, and it just tons, you hear him, Nikki, tons of excuses. And the one thing that I will often ask is, okay, do you want to do it? Because if you say you don't want to do it, then that's legitimate in mind. But if you say, "Oh, I'm too old, I'm too fat, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money," it's like, okay, those are excuses. You can get around that. Even things about risk, like, "Oh, it's too risky." You can break risk down, but I get some of that stuff. But it's like, do you fundamentally want to do it? Then try to figure out how can you go do it.
Brilliantly said, man. Brilliantly said. So tell me, what made you write the book?
It's also one of these things. I go back to when I was in college, and I took a course and I wrote down that life's list, and one of them was to write a book. And I thought, I think it'd be cool. But I also needed to have a body of knowledge that I didn't have enough. I didn't have enough knowledge, or I didn't have anything worthy to say at that point. And then, but I knew it's just I wanted to understand the discipline. I wanted to understand kind of what's involved in writing a book, and I thought it'd be fun. But why this book is about 10 years ago, I was on a 300-mile bike ride. It's one day. I was riding for 24, ended up being 25 hours, and I did the ride because I wanted to see how far I could push my mind and my body. I thought this would be the point where things would break down, and I could find that limit, my kind of own personal limit. And earlier in the day, I'd seen a fellow cyclist dead on the side of the road, because the first 200 miles was an organized ride, and then I did 100 miles on my own. I kind of finished it and then did 100 miles on my own. And another cyclist died in the first 200 miles, and that's like kind of shook me. And then I was coming through an aid station, and another guy came out and hit me, caused me to need a new front wheel, and that kind of shook me a little bit. But I continued on, and at mile 275, and I remember this because I only had 25 miles left, I thought, it was a hard day, but I never reached that limit, and I can see the finish line. And it got me thinking about, sometimes we put these limits in our head and they hold us back. And that's when kind of the book started to form. And then I thought, okay, I need something else to push me. And I got involved in running. And then, after I did the 200-mile run around Lake Tahoe, I thought, there's something here. There's a book here, and it started to form. And I had some of the things that I had done, kind of an ultra distance athlete, and some of it applied on the work side. Yeah. But I wanted to learn from 100 other people. I wanted to learn from a bunch of other people, and I just kind of randomly said 100 people. And most of those people, so 3/4 of them were going to be on the business side. And then the remaining were going to be on the sports side, because I sense there's a lot of similarities, just personally, and some talking to some friends. And I know one of your guests, Rick Vive, who I listened to his show, he's on the sports side, and he talks about stuff that relates to business. And so I wanted to be able to see that connection as people that accomplish big things in the office, at work, often accomplish big things elsewhere. And there's a lot of similarities between what you have to do in sports or in business. And that's how epic performance came to be. And it's that framework to kind of think big and then take it across the finish line.
I like it, man. I like the acronym. It's really good stuff. The story that you have behind it of how you came to finish the 300-mile ride is very powerful too. So who's the audience this book is aimed for? Who do you want this to impact the most?
Yeah. So there's two kind of people I think would be appropriate. First of all, it's that person relatively new in their career, and they've got some ideas, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I get there? And part of it is encouraging them to think further out than just 1 year or 2 years. And then that other audience is person that's kind of in the middle of their career that is, they're trying to figure out, do I pivot? Or what do I new? Yeah, 'cause they're 30 or 40 years or 50, 45 years old. They still have a lot of runway ahead of them. And they're, I know you're just talking to friends, you get to that certain age, it's like, oh, I'm too old for that. It's like, maybe you're not. How I don't want people to get to be at the end of their life and think, I wish I would have started my own business. I wish I would have traveled the world, whatever it is. I mean, we have these dreams, and we have this limited time on this earth. Unfortunately, we don't know how it is. I mean, my wife's biological father died in his early 30s.
Wow.
Both her grandparents lived to be 94, and both her grandmothers lived to be almost 102.
Wow.
So, we don't know how long we have on the life, but on this
No, we don't.
planet. But let's use the time, and let's not get toward the end and go, oh man, I wish I would have, whatever, fill in the blank.
That's very powerful and very true. I'm in my mid 50s as well. I just turned 55. And the thing that really is on my mind right now is, what is it that I have wanted to accomplish that I've yet to accomplish?
Yeah.
So when I was a young boy, I always wanted to be a best-selling novelist. So last year, I befriended a man who sold several million books as a novelist. His name is Jeff Michael Hopf. He wrote a series of books. Over a 9-year period, he wrote like 40 novels, and he sold a whole whack of them. And then he took a couple of years off. Now he's back writing again. I interviewed him a year ago, and I just recently interviewed him again for my men's podcast. And it reminded me, hey man, this has been part of your dream. You wrote the book, it's ready. Go out there and self-publish it, if nothing else. And maybe the next one you go out, you have a traditional publisher publish it. But that's been one of my dreams, man. So this novel, I've written 8 books, but I haven't got a novel out there. This novel's got to get out there, and it's got to get published first and foremost, right? Secondly, I'm keen on making sure that my 2 sons, I raise them to be good men out in the world. They're teenagers. That's on my mind. So like, I'm thinking about that and working on that all the time. And I want to be accomplishing more from a business point of view. I mean, I've done decently, but I want to do more. Those are the things that are spurring me on. And interesting that you talk about, folks who say, I'm too old to do that, too old to run, too old to bike. That's a load of bull crap from my perspective. Yeah. It's a total load of bull crap. I used to be a top fitness trainer. I stopped when I got more into the business consulting side of things. And I wasn't quite as diligent with my health and fitness as I was back in those days. Up until my mid 40s, that was my focus. And I was really, really jacked and fit and all that good stuff. In the last 8, 9, 10 years, my eye hasn't been on the ball. I still worked out, but the nutrition hasn't been as solid. I haven't, what I'm saying, all that jazz. And just this summer, I said to myself, fuck it, no more of that crap. And eat clean, eat right. The biggest mistake that I've been doing was I just eat a ton of food late at night. I just would let myself eat late, which I'd never done before. But for the last 10 years, I just eat a ton of food late in life. On August 1st, I said, okay, that's done. That is done. And that hasn't happened since then, and that's what I think everybody's got to do is, if you got a dream, if you got a desire, and you haven't really taken the steps to make it happen, and you live in a first world country like ours, man, get with it.
I love, ice cream is my weakness. So I get that point about, eating. At some point you have to stop. And I remember when I was training, I mean, you hit on some great points, and I'd love to make a few comments. When I was training, I said to my wife, I said, honey, don't buy ice cream, because if it's in the house, I'll eat it. So Stop the source. But what I loved you just did, Nikki, and I think it's so powerful. And I talk about, the concept in the book is you just shared a couple of things that are on your wish list, your bucket list, your life's list, whatever we call it. You want to be a novelist, be a best-selling novelist. And the fact that you just told me and all of your listeners is a commitment that, okay, you are now, there's a lot of things that are in our head that it's like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this. But once we say it out loud, that's a first level of commitment. And so I know that if I am talking to you in 6 months, or our paths cross again, I'm going to say, hey, Nikki, how's that novel going? And I remember when I was writing my book, it took me a couple of years to get it written, and I knew that, okay, I'm going to see somebody and they're going to ask me how the book's going.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have to tell them the same story.
Yeah.
I don't want to, oh yeah, I'm 30% through. And then, 6 months later I see them, oh, how you doing? Oh, I'm 30% through. I want to show progress. And so you tell somebody that, and you got somebody else that's holding you accountable. So I love what you do. And at the end of the day, I mean, so many times we don't do something because we're afraid we'll fail. And even writing a book, it's like, what if nobody buys the book? And I thought, what if nobody buys the book? Nobody buys the book. It's like, I still accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. But what if somebody does buy the book and it helps change their life? So if nobody buys the book, what have I lost? I've lost a little bit of time, and I've lost a little bit of money. I could probably afford both of those. So the risk isn't that big. We often think about the worst case scenario as opposed to kind of the realistic worst case scenario.
If this is, your first book, I don't think you lose even if you don't sell a single book. I think you win because you wrote the book, right?
Yeah.
And that's what was the case with my first book. I've not sold thousands and thousands of copies of my books in total. I've probably sold 5,000 copies. I've given away that many as well.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, my first book got into the hands of a lot of ideal clients for me. And I followed up those conversations, those experiences of them getting the book with phone calls and meetings.
Yeah.
And I set up conversations to discover what issues those people were dealing with. Like, a lot of coaches and consultants in our space are really, really talented at what they do. They hate to sell. The very concept of selling gives them the willies, right? And they just go in their head, oh my God, I don't want to come across as sales, especially people from a corporate background. I don't want to come across as pushy. What are they going to think of me? They're going to think I'm one of those people with commission breath leaking off of me.
Right.
Like, people just think that, right? Those people don't get clients they should be getting. That's a fact. There are people that they should be talking to, but that fear holds them back from making that connection properly and having that work being done by them with that individual or that organization. Why is that bad? Well, obviously it's bad for you because your business suffers, doesn't get as much revenue as you should be. Your self-esteem takes a bit of a hit. Oh my God, they should have worked with me. What's wrong with you? Why didn't they work with you? All that crap that goes through your head. The client suffers because a good, talented person that could have really solved the problem for them doesn't. So they're going to continue to suffer with whatever the pain is. And then some charlatan marketer is going to come out there who has no compunction about that crap. He's going to get the business because he's a sizzle seller, right? And he's going to grab that business, but he's not going to deliver because he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, right? And the sum total of goodness in the world is reduced for all three individuals. Even the charlatan marketer doesn't have his comeuppance, which he richly deserves, and doesn't have God give him the message he's supposed to get, and he's going to continue along the wrong path. And all that happens. So this has been one of my blessings, is I'm really good at helping those people reframe all that negativity in their head from selling to serving. Nobody wants to be sold, but everybody wants to serve people, right? Everybody wants to be served, serve. And if you help somebody, and this obviously can't happen in a 30-second or 2-minute conversation. This takes time to get that done. But I've been able to help really good people who are making, a decent living, 6 figures, mid, or, $250,000, $500,000, whatever it is, but really ought to be making 2, 3, 4 times that, right? Let's be honest, based on I help those people do that. And that makes me happy, because that's what I think a lot of people in our space are hurting, because they're not doing that, right? The other big issue, one that you don't suffer from, is that a lot of them try to be all things to all people. Thankfully, you figured that out, that you can't do that, and it doesn't work, and it's not good. But to me, those two things, along with positioning yourself in a way that doesn't truly show your greatness, is what causes people to fail. And it causes people not to achieve what they should achieve. And maybe the world will look at their success and go, no, what are you talking about? They're not failing. They're doing great. But inside, they don't feel like they're doing great. They feel like they're failing.
I wish I would have talked to you like 10 years ago, Nikki. Yeah, because I don't like to sell. But then I have to shift it. It's like, I'm not selling them. I'm giving them something that will help them. And it really helps me focus. And I was always hesitant, and this is one thing that the book just nailed for me really well. I was always hesitant to ask, for fear that I would get no. It's like, hey, Nikki, can I be on your podcast? And I'd be worried that you'd say no. And even when I went out to interview, I set a goal of I want to interview 100 people. And I thought, how many people am I going to have to ask in order to get 100? And what blows me out of the water is I only had to ask 102. I only had 2 people that said no. And it reinforced that if you don't ask, the answer's no.
Always no.
Yeah, it's always no. If you do ask, sometimes the answer's yes. And so you're going to get more yeses than when you ask than when you don't ask. And so it's like asking. It's like, hey, I want to be on Nikki's podcast. It's like, it's a really good podcast. I'm going to ask. You could have said no, and if you would have said no, it's like, okay, I can move on. What's the worst case that's going to happen to me? Maybe I'm going to be I'm going to feel a little bit down for a moment, but I'm going to survive.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And it's like, and I remember if I were to go back and be my 10 or my 13-year-old self, I remember, and maybe you do as well. You're a good-looking guy, so you probably don't have this. But I remember, at the 7th grade dance, and you're looking at, or 8th grade dance, and you're looking across the gym, and you see the pretty girl that you want to go ask to dance, but it's like it's 1.5 miles to walk across the gym.
Yeah.
And you're afraid to hear no. And I remember that, and it's like, okay, man, if you walk across, well, if I don't walk across, the answer's no. And if I walk across and ask her if she wants to dance, maybe the answer's yes. But I'll tell you, it's a long walk back if the answer's no. But you survive. So it's like, go out and try some things, and you may fail.
Now, when I was a young teenager, I was painfully aware of my shortcomings with the opposite sex. It took me a long time to be a little bit less awkward than I was. I didn't really have a girlfriend until I was 17 or 18 years old.
Yeah. So. I am glad I'm happily married, and my wife loves me, because I would hate to be dating. It's like, because all those insecurities come back, but that's a whole different podcast.
Oh, listen, being in a great relationship is a wonderful thing. It's a great blessing for 100%. And you're right, it is a topic for another podcast. So so your book, so if people are wanting to get a hold of your book or get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, so you can go onto Amazon. It's on Amazon in hard copy or on Kindle version. Epic Performances, Lessons from 100 executives and endurance athletes on reaching your peak. Or you can go to epicperformances.com. And so that's EPIC performances with an S.com. And you can learn more about me and connect up with me. I also have an assessment that you can take, an assessment of how well you perform in those 5 different areas. And if you go in to Epic Performances, you can take the assessment for free, and it'll ask for a business code or a code, and just type in revolution, and it ties into yours. So you can go get that, and then I'll turn the assessment around in about 24 hours.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, we'll make sure all that's information in the show notes, and that'll be available to folks to jump all over. And listener, Bryan Gilette, the man with the incredible last name, he's the man who's the real deal. His book sounds absolutely fantastic. I'm definitely going to grab a copy and read it. I love to read. I love to learn from smart people. Bryan's definitely a smart man. And Bryan, we end off each and every single episode by asking you, as our guest expert, what are your top 3 expert action steps? These are your best pieces of advice to help my listener take his or her life and business to the next level. So what do you say?
Ask yourself, will I regret doing this when I'm 80 or 20, 30 years down the road? Identify the 5 things in life that you want to do. It could be 3, it could be 4, it could be 5, but identify a couple of things that you want to do before you leave this planet. And then choose one of them and write down one thing you can do in the next 72 hours that will move you forward on one of those. And then once you do it, repeat that and figure out another thing you can do in the next 72 hours. And then, it's that put one step in front of the other, and soon you'll be walking out the door. You're old enough to remember that Christmas song. Amazing. So, yeah.
Amazing. So Bryan, those are 3 awesome expert action steps. So listener, Bryan Gilette, the real deal. Go check out his book. Go check out his website. All that information is going to be in the show notes. Get in touch with him. He's been very gracious and generous, and said that if you want to get in touch with him, he's up for that. Not every guest wants that. So when a top level guest that's on this show offers that, I suggest that you take him up on it. Here's the amazing thing, Bryan, you'll probably be lucky to get 1 or 2 people to do it, because most people they just go, oh, I shouldn't do it. It's just crazy, man. It's incredible. I was on a show with millions of downloads, and I had 40 people reach out to me out of like 5 million that heard it. It was crazy. And they said, look, it's good that you put it out there, but most people are going, I don't want to bother the guy. Bother him.
Hey,
bother him.
Bother me.
Bother him. Listener, make sure you take advantage of getting in touch with Bryan. And, that wraps up another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. To find out more about today's amazing guest, the one and only Bryan Gilette, make sure that you go to thethoughtleaderrevolution.com show notes, or wherever you happen to listen to this podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Audible, Google Play, wherever the heck it is. Go to the show notes, check it all out, get in touch with the man. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't be stingy. Share it with someone else who needs the message. That's what we ask you to do. I learned this from Andy Frisella from the Real AF podcast. The fee for the show is always share, share, share. That's always the fee for the show. So we ask you to do that. Share, share, share. Until next time, goodbye.
This episode has been brought to you by eCircleAcademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.